some yellow, which is Azo Yellow Medium. So this is an Amsterdam paint color. These come out of the Netherlands, big surprise. And they're kind of like a student grade paint, but they're pretty good. I just bought a couple colors to test them and see what they're like. I usually use, I like golden paints a lot, especially the fluid paints, but I usually use this brand from Granville Island in Vancouver and Chroma, and it's a nice paint too. So there's my 3 colors, and I'm going to put out a dollop of white. So I buy my titanium white in a big bucket. So let's see, I'll put it over here. This is a little tip for you. I decant it out. That's probably more than I need, but I'll use it up. If you're not going to use it up, put out less paint and then you can get out more if you need it. Yeah, so with the big buckets of paint, what I do is decant it into a small container, because I am notorious for getting it really mucked up, because sometimes I dip my dirty brush into it, etc., etc. So it just keeps my big container a little bit pure. And also the other thing is, I don't know if any of you have had this happen, but I've had acrylic paint mold in a jar from getting bacteria in it. So I don't like to have too big a jar. I'm just going to mix some colors down. So I have a couple of tints. So a tint is when we add white to a color, and a tone is when we add black. And we won't be using black today. If we want to darken something, we'll just do it with our primary. So I'm going to mix a lighter color and mix a lighter color, my red, which is going to, of course, turn pink. And every red has its own kind of pinky color because the pigments are different. So this red was pyrrole red. Didn't have a clean palette knife either. Now, usually I also have a paper on the side of me, which I use to wipe my paint off before I put it on my paper towel. So this might just be a background for anything, but it's just my way of offloading my paint. And I waste less paper towels and my water doesn't get as dirty as quickly. So let's see. Well, I'll mix a bit of blue. I don't know if I'm going to use a lighter blue, but mix it a bit. And I'm going to mix some green. So because obviously there's going to be some green leaves happening. Just making sure I'm in the screen here. So green, I shouldn't have taken so much blue. Start with your yellow when you mix green, because yellow is more transparent, and then add a little bit of blue to it. So I had a little bit of blue in my palette knife. Don't do it the other way, because you'll end up just mixing so much paint. So that's given me quite a nice green. That's the ultramarine blue with that azo yellow. Now, if I want to neutralize this green, and I'll have to make a bit more probably, but just to show you, if I want to neutralize it, by neutralizing, I mean making it a little duller, a little grayer. I take a little bit of the opposite. Now, I mean a little bit. That was probably too much. So you can see that this is starting to go kind of like an olive green. Like that's how you get muddy colors. But I want something that's a little bit different and not as bright. So that's got that. See, I'll have a painting done from mixing my colors. So I'm also going to try mixing some yellow with my red, and I'm not going to use too much red because the yellow is, like I said, it's the weak color, so I don't want to make it a big pile here. Now to any of these colors, we can add white to them to change them as well. So let me add a little bit of white to that. So it's mix and match. Anything that's here you can add. So we could add some pink to this and get a bit of a coral color happening. So I can go on and on with these three colors, but it shows you that you can make a lot of colors out of three colors. And you can dull them down by adding the opposite. So sometimes the opposite is it ends up being all the colors. So blue, for instance, is the opposite of orange, and orange is made with red and yellow. So we've got red, yellow, and blue mixed together. So use your color wheel if you're not as familiar with that. But that's what you're going to do, is mix up a bit of color. And for this, I suggested you use a sponge, but you can also use a paper towel or a combination of the two. And we're going to decide kind of what colors the flowers are going to be. And I'm going to go with these colors I mix, kind of the pinks and orange and peachy colors. And I'm going to use some brighter stuff as well. So what I'm going to do is think about...
Is your sponge wet?
Yes, that's a good question. The sponge, I dipped it in the water and squeezed it out so it's dry. And you would do that with a brush too. And the reason for doing that is because the paint will absorb into whatever you pick it up on. And so if it's a dry brush or a dry sponge, a lot of that product is going to go into your brush or sponge, and that's not what we want. So by having it damp, it's not as absorbent. So that's why you would do it. So I'm just going to take, and we're going to sponge paint. So remember that when you're painting, I always go back to the days of faux painting, when people were doing faux finishes and it started to look like a dog ran across the wall. We don't want that. So make sure you're moving your hand around so you get different kind of marks, you know, and a little bit bigger marks, smaller marks, and different variations of color going on. And we're just going to paint the whole background. And this is a little 6x6 mixed media paper by Strathmore. I like painting on this a lot. I do a lot of my bigger paintings on this as well. And then I mount them on the board at the end. So I get I can store a lot in a drawer until I need some more inventory. That's mounted. So we're not putting this on very thick because we want it to dry fairly quickly. So on mine, it's absorbing into the paper. So can you see already that's there is almost kind of a florally look starting to happen on this. Maybe put just a little dash of red in places. So that was easy, hey? There we go. Layer one. Do you guys want to do mix your paint, or you're working as I'm doing this? I can see some of you are doing something. Okay, so I'm going to put a shape in a little bit more like a vase down at the bottom. You don't have to, because I'm going to show you how to do your composition. I'm going to talk a little bit about composition. So when we're doing a bouquet of flowers, or anything for that matter, we don't want the vase to really end up smack dab in the center. It's not the best composition overall. So we're going to play with the rule of thirds. It's one of the most successful ways to get a good balanced painting. So think of a tic-tac-toe game where you're dividing it into the 9 squares. Where the squares cross is a good place for a focal point. So we don't normally want the focal point dead center on a piece of art because it looks like a target. So in this case, my focal point is off to the side, and that's pretty much in that quadrant. The vase is off center. The other thing that's really a nice thing to do is to take your bouquet off the page or off the canvas, because this expands the bouquet and it makes your painting look bigger, makes your eye go out of the canvas. It doesn't feel as confined or outlined as if you were to outline all around it. So if you have a really good imagination and lots of experience at doing this kind of thing, you can just kind of continue. But if you don't, this is a little trick that I like to use, and I use this a lot. So you can use chalk pastel, or you can just use chalkboard chalk. It doesn't matter which one you use. So sometimes I like chalk pastel because I can actually see it better if it's colored. So I'm going to go with an opposite so I can see it. So I'm going to have a vase, and I'm going to start kind of going around some of this as if there was a shape there. I'll put in a bit of a line here for my tabletop. You'll also want your vase to be a little bit rounded on the corners at the bottom instead of straight off, unless you're going really contemporary and doing something different, which is fine too. The other thing also is to have a little bit of your flowers coming on top of the vase so we don't see that. So I'm just going to kind of, and this can all be changed later. I'm just coming along and seeing where these flowers feel like they are. Okay, something like that. I can reduce it if I want, and there'll be little bits and pieces in between. So now I'm going to take a paintbrush, and again, I'm wetting it. You can't see that because my water bucket's off there, but I'm going to paint some around the background. Now, you could do white and then paint a color, but I'm actually going to just dive in and do some green. So I'm going to, I'll start with this green that I have. My brush is a little bit too wet, actually. Put some more white in. The other thing is you want to bring a bit of your background color in a couple places into your flowers while you're doing this. And this background color, you know, I may change it later or add another layer, but for now, just trying to get the essence of my bouquet here. Okay. So I'm going to add a bit of the opposite here. down into the table. So I'm going to take some, not the opposite of orange, I'm going to take some blue, mix it in with that green, and just do some color along here. I'm going to put in a darker shadow. We'll kind of wet into wet and let it smudge. There we have that. And again, I can straighten this out more later if I want to. And don't be afraid to get your fingers in there to do some blending, or, you know, a paper towel or your sponge. So that's kind of the first little bit here. I'm going to carve out a little bit more. It looks a bit like a foreign object, not a bouquet of flowers. So let me come back in and just get rid of a little bit more. So now my flowers should be pretty dry. I'm going to go back into them and start adding a little bit more color in my bouquet as well. Oh, I don't like that. I get a bit more juice in there. So when you're using a brush to add some extra layers as well, keep your brush, hold it down by the end of the handle instead of up by the ferrule of the brush. When we hold it up like this, we tend to get really tight in our strokes. So if we hold it back, we don't have the control, so we can get it a little bit looser. Okay, so I'm feeling like my vase needs to have a contrast, and I need some darks in my flowers as well. So a little bit of that, a little bit more light. So I'm thinking now of, you know, a big flower for my focal point somewhere, like I pointed out to you before. This is a bamboo skewer. It's got paint all over the end, but I'm just going to scratch into my wet paint. See if I can get some marks that resemble flowers going on here. And sorry, I didn't ask you to bring a skewer. You can use the end of a paintbrush if you have a small end as well. So it's just something I felt like doing, so couldn't help myself. So we want to be cognizant of value as well, that we get a little bit of lights and darks and not just all the same color throughout our painting. And I'm going to change up the color of the vase. So we're also going to put a highlight where the light hits the vase as well. Put a little bit of that color in the bouquet. So highlight. Now, while the paint's wet, you can really scratch into it to get a little bit more line quality. And your dark paint can look a little bit like centers in some of your flowers as well. Okay. Well, that's starting to take on the shape of a bouquet. So from here, I can just keep making adjustments to this so that it just starts looking more like a bouquet, has a little more definition. Okay, so I'm just going to do a little bit of refining. I also might just do a little bit of spattering with a toothbrush. So when you do toothbrush spattering, it needs to be fairly liquefied. And the trick is to just hold your finger underneath on the brush and pull across it. So that's not giving it too much contrast. I'll try with the lighter color. Oh, I got some kind of big blobs happening there. Okay, but I like what happened down at the bottom on the vase and stuff. I like what happened there, but these are maybe a little bit too much. I'll just blot them down. There we go. So you can definitely add and subtract till your heart's content with this method. But I'm going to go in now and just try and clean up around my vase and the background a little bit. And maybe, I think I'll neutralize my background color a bit more as well. And so the other thing is about value, and value is from dark to light. And so another way to look at it is, you know, the contrast in your colors. So these values, the green and the peach I have, are all really close together. So if I want the flowers to pop out, I'm going to make my background a little quieter. I'm going to push it back and I neutralize the color so it's not such a bright green. So you'll just see what happens now that those flowers underneath there are just popping forward. Yeah, so I'm happier with that. Now I'm just going to come into my bouquet in a few places and add a little bit brighter green. So if there's a few maybe leaf shapes happening here and there. And if you watch, I'm just using the lightest touch on the brush near the end so that it's just kind of giving it a flick here and there. And I'll go back here and clean that up a little too, I think. So I'm going to try the end of my brush in here. No, it's not enough contrast. I thought maybe I could get a striped effect, but not happening. Alrighty. Just going to go back in with the end of my brush here and put in a couple of places of a little brighter saturated color, just to pop it up a little bit. So just in a few places. So that makes a difference too. And let's see. Maybe put a little bit of the rusty color in the vase on this. I don't know, just in there. So you got to talk yourself through these paintings, you know? Okay, I'm just going to take a moment and I'm going to blow dry this so it's really dry so I can use the acrylic paint pens on it as well. One thing I suggested you have was a fine liner brush, but you can also use paint pens, but I'm just going to show you different things you could do to bring up a little bit more detail and interest. So I like to use just a fine little paint brush, again, holding it near the end, having quite thin paint on, and just kind of randomly make a bit of marks. Other things you can use are a Stabilo Markall pencil. So this one is pink, hot pink, but I don't have an orange one, so I'll just show you with it. So we could use something like this to do a little bit of mark making and detailing in here as well. Outline something along the edge of the table. And again, I'm just trying to get some floral-like marks, keeping my pen really loose. I'm not trying to outline stuff. I'm just trying to make some interest. And some of this can go beyond the flower shape. So yeah. And other things you can use are the Jelly Roll pen by Sakura, I think makes it, Japanese pen company. So hopefully you need to have this on dry paint. Yeah. Otherwise it will wreck the nib. I think my Jelly Roll is just about done. But in this painting, you can see some of the white marks. That's with the Jelly Roll pen. You can get quite nice fine lines. And I used it in this one as well. And the other thing I like using a lot is the Posca pens. And I have an orange one here. So Posca is acrylic pen, and so no need to seal it, or it just dries nice. So I'm just mark making in here, maybe like thinking of flowers with a little bit of tendrils or interesting shapes. Put a little orange around my vase. Yeah, so that's another thing you can do. One thing that's bothering me about this painting is these two blue things next to each other. It's looking a bit like an eye, two eyeballs. So I'm gonna just get rid of that one. There we go. Yeah, so with these, you like to not keep working on them till you like overdo it, because it's easy to do that. We want to keep them fairly loose and fresh. And having a working mat is really a good thing to have. So this is a mat that I've used for a long time, and I just quickly repainted it this morning because it had so much on the edges, but that's why it's curling up a bit. But anyway, you get the idea. When you confine it, it just, you can see if there's some issues or places that need to be changed. And I just treat these kind of like a fast study, nothing to be labored at forever. Something to do when you don't have a lot of time. I think I'll put a little bit of stronger highlight on my vase actually as I looked at it in the mat. So that's the thing with the mat, is sometimes it really points out what's missing or what needs to go. So it's nice to have a working mat. Now I got this on my palette knife from mixing, so I'm just gonna go ahead and use it on my palette knife. Get a little bit more of a highlight. There we go. Okay, I think I'll call that one done. A little green on this edge. Yeah, if you mess around too long, you start to lose the freshness. So she says she's going to mess around some more. I'm just going to add a little stronger dark to my focus here. So your eye goes there.